Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the authors at Google. I'm going to introduce Jonathan Steiner, who's a sous chef from Bon Appetit, and he's going to introduce our author. So before we do that, I just want to say that we have pies here that Jonathan's going to be passing out. So if you're interested, you can have a slice while you watch the demo. So thanks.
Hi, everybody. We have a very special treat for you today. This is Jeanne Kelley from Eagle Rock, California. She's a food stylist, author, and chef. She's written numerous articles over the past 20 years for Bon Appetit magazine and Cooking Light as well. And she's going to be cooking her banana cream pie for us. So enjoy. Welcome.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. If you have any questions while I'm doing the demo, please just ask away. It's not going to interrupt me at all. Today I'm going to show you how to make a very easy banana cream pie. It's so easy that you can almost get it done in an hour. Now, there's a couple of things about this pie that are interesting in the technique. Basically, we're going to make a crust that's considered wrong. When you make a crust, a pastry chef, they usually have a technique of you incorporate the fat into your flour very carefully, usually with cold hands or a sharp implement, and that is to achieve flakiness and tenderness. But we're not going to do that. We're going to melt butter and pour melted butter into a mixture of flour and sugar and a little bit of salt. And the crust will not be flaky, but it'll be more like a cookie, and that hard cookie texture is really delicious with the cream topping. When you make a crust the traditional way and you want to do a cream pie, you have to go through this process of it's called baking blind, and that's rolling out the crust, and you put it in your pie pan, and then you have to let it sit to let the glutens in the flour rest. And the glutens in the flour are what makes pizza or bread dough stretchy and chewy, and that's what you don't want with pastry. And then you have to line it with parchment paper and put beans in it and bake it, and it's very time consuming. So this way we're just making a little shortcut, and it just really results in a very delicious crust. So I've got 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour in my bowl with 1/4 cup of sugar. And I like to use unbleached all-purpose flour. And here's 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now, I do buy 3 kinds of salt. I usually use a fork when I put this together, but we'll use a spoon for today. I use sea salt, but the fine-grained sea salt in my baking. I use kosher salt when I cook. And then when I like to season food, like a freshly laid egg, fried egg, I like to use a little bit of fancy French salt because it just tastes so good. So we're mixing this together. This was 11 tablespoons of unsalted butter that we melted.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So you said that you use sea salt for baking.
I do.
I know that some bakers use or prefer kosher salt. Is there any reason not?
I love kosher salt, and that's what I use with all my cooking because it has such a wonderful, I don't tend to over salt with it. If I use salt in a salt shaker, it's very difficult for me to gauge how much salt I'm adding to something. But if I'm using kosher salt, I can just pinch it, and it's just great. You know, you just kind of get the sense and the practice of how much to add. The problem with using kosher salt when I bake is that sometimes the grains are a little bit large, and they don't always dissolve in whatever it is that you're doing. So we've mixed the flour here, and here I have a pie pan, and there's 2 kinds of pie pans. This is the classic pie pan. This is a deep dish pie pan, and this really is the one you want. This is the hot ticket because it's got this edge that sits flat, and when you're baking a traditional pie, it allows you to have that pretty edge, and it has a place to sit. So you're just going to dump this mixture, and it's kind of an tidy mixture. But instead of going through the fuss of rolling something out, you're just going to press it in the pan. And if it bothers you to touch something, you can go ahead and put a plastic baggie on your hand. But I don't mind touching it. So the beauty of this crust is once you press it in, and you just want it to be even, is that you don't need to let it rest. It doesn't have to be chilled. You can just pop it straight into the oven and bake it, and it won't budge. Because I don't know, has anybody done that where you've tried to bake a crust and had it slip in? It's very frustrating. So, like with any baked good, you always want it to be even so that it bakes evenly. So that way you don't have little parts where it burns. So, once you get that in, like that. So basically, pretty even. It doesn't really matter. It's going to be filled with custard. So once you bake this in the oven for 20 minutes at 350 degrees, it looks like this. It's pretty nice looking for something that took that little bit of a time. So because I like chocolate, I like to add a thin layer of chocolate to my banana cream pie. And so I have 3 ounces of bittersweet chocolate. I like to use chocolate that's between 54 and 61% about cacao. Otherwise, it can be a little bit too bitter. Especially when you're baking, it's nice to use chocolate in that with that amount of cacao. So what I have here is one of those little, these generally people use when they're cooking with raw meat. It's great because you can just cook them straight into the washing machine or the sink to wash them. I find they're really wonderful when you're working with chocolate as well, because you chop chocolate up and it melts so easily that it just gets all over your cutting board and everything like that. So it's great to use a big knife like this when you're cutting chocolate because it just really lets you get there. So let's just chop the chocolate up here. Now my book is called Blue Eggs and Yellow Tomatoes because I have chickens in my backyard. And it's really great to have chickens. And the book has a chapter in the back about raising chickens, and I highly recommend it. It's very rewarding. So this has come out of the oven, we're going to pretend, and it's hot. And all you have to do is just dump the chocolate in, and then carefully, because you don't want to hurt the crust, which will be tender because when it's hot, and you spread the chocolate around and you just let it sit for about 5 minutes. And the heat of the crust will melt it. And then I take an offset spatula. This is just a wonderful tool. These are just my favorite. And you just spread it out. And so we'll set these 2 things aside. And then it'll look like this. And it'll be a little bit melty, so I usually put it in the refrigerator while I'm working on the filling. Now the filling is a traditional pudding, basically. And I've got 2 1/3 cups of milk here. And I use 2% milk, which is low-fat milk, because that's what I drink at home. And so I just think, well, you might as well use the milk that you drink. If you drink whole milk, great. The only time you're going to run into a problem is if you drink non-fat milk. And sometimes 1% can be a little bit too low on fat content. This is a vanilla bean, and I just cut it in half lengthwise. Vanilla beans are actually pods, and they have tons of tiny little seeds in them. And what you want to do is put that into the milk so it can infuse with the milk. And then you can either scrape these before or after. It's a little tidier sometimes if you scrape it ahead of time. But you want all these wonderful seeds. And You could use a half a vanilla bean if you didn't want such a strong vanilla flavor. If you don't have a vanilla bean, you can use vanilla extract. These vanilla beans are great. I buy them mail order through the internet. If you go to the supermarket and buy one of these, it'll probably cost you about $7 or $8, which is pretty costly. And the quality that the ones that you get sent to you, there's all different kinds of vanilla brokers, are so much better, and they usually end up costing less than $1 a piece. But I don't know if you're interested in this bean. You see how lovely and smelling it is. So we've got that. It's coming to a simmer. So here's the eggs. Here are the beautiful blue eggs, or here is a beautiful blue egg that my Araucana chicken lays. And so I brought those in just so you could see what that looked like. It's really kind of fun to have the blue eggs. But we just need 5 eggs, so I brought 6 just in case I broke one, because sometimes the fresh eggs are a little bit more difficult to separate than cold eggs. So I'm gonna but you can see how beautiful and just the dark, dark yellow the yolks are. So up on the screen, I just kind of chose a selection of photographs from my garden and my chickens. I think there's one of my kitchen in there. Making pies. It's kind of a popular activity around my house. So separate, and some people prefer to use their hands. However you want to do it. So we've got the 5 egg yolks here that we'll mix with a half a cup of sugar, and a 1/4 cup of cornstarch. Whisk that together. You want to be careful when you're cooking with eggs and sugar. You don't want to dump the sugar on the yolks and then just let it sit, because the sugar tends to react with the yolks. It creates these little unpleasant lumps. So you whisk that together. Then you want to very, very gradually pour in this hot milk mixture. And you do that gradually because you don't want your eggs to curdle, although there is cornstarch in here. And the cornstarch acts like a binder so that you actually can bring this mixture to a boil and your eggs won't curdle. Generally, when you're cooking with egg yolks, you don't ever want them to come to a boil because they'll curdle. So if you were making a crème anglaise, which is like a custard base, you always cook it, they say, oh, till it coats the back of the spoon, being careful not to let it boil. But this, because of the cornstarch, we're going to let it boil. You have to let it boil. If you don't let it boil, there's an enzyme in the egg yolk that will react with the cornstarch, and it will break down the cornstarch after a while, and the custard, even though it'll look like it's nice and thick, it'll sit in your refrigerator overnight, and you'll cut into your pie, and it'll go bleh. So you've got to make sure it boils. So you want to whisk this while you're doing it the entire time, because you don't want it to form a skin on the bottom. I made some pies at home to bring in for you. I also brought a version of the pie since we still have peaches available in the farmer's market and they're still really good. I made a white peach version and I put white chocolate on the crust instead of dark chocolate. And I put a half a cup of almonds in the crust. And so that's a very delicious variation. And instead of putting rum in the custard, which is what I do with the banana, I put a little amaretto in there. And the amaretto really tastes good with the white peaches. So there's an option for you. So this is getting really thick. My arm's getting very tired. Gotta switch to the other one. And as you can see, you just got to make sure it's boiled because you don't want that horrible thing to happen where it turns into, boom, there, good. Nice big bubble. So you remove this from the heat. We're going to turn that off. And at this point, we will pretend like we're putting 2 tablespoons of rum in here. I didn't want to travel with the open container in my car. And here is the custard, where it has been cooling to room temperature, like the recipe says. So you've got that baked. While that's baking, you've made your custard. This is in the refrigerator. The chocolate is chilling. This is coming to room temperature. And I'm just going to give this a nice stir to loosen it up, and you want to remove the vanilla bean. Now, I always save the vanilla beans because they still actually have quite a bit of perfume to them. So what you can do is you take that out of the custard, wash them, rinse them in water, put them out to dry, and then after they've dried, you can do one of 2 things. You can either put them in a bottle of vanilla that you bought that kind of boosts the flavor. You could make your own vanilla by putting a bunch of them in a little bit of bourbon. Or what you can do is you can make your own vanilla sugar, and you put it in the food processor. You break them into bits because they dry out and they get very crisp. And so you put it in the food processor with some sugar and you process that. You put it through a strainer to get out the big bits, and then you have really nice vanilla sugar. And you can use that to put it on fruit, or if you're using a French cookbook that calls for vanilla sugar, you can use that then. So, get these egg whites away. So we're going to put about half of the custard in the bottom of our pan, and you can kind of eyeball that instead of measuring it, because basically what you want to do is just make sure you're covering the bottom. And smooth that around. Go. And then we've got some nice ripe bananas here. And these are pretty small, so you'd want to use 2. This is quite the bend here. This is one of the lowest kitchen counters I think I've ever worked on. So I like to slice the bananas at a diagonal just because it creates a bigger piece, and then that way I don't have to spend quite so much time putting little banana circles on the custard, but either way works. So I do a lot of vegetable gardening, and so you might be wondering why I'm making a banana cream pie. But I figured it was coming into October, and we're going to hit those months where the apples are just coming in, pears are coming in, so it's nice to have something to do. And besides, bananas are so good. got to eat a banana, especially a banana cream pie. So in the book, there's also a guide to starting a simple kitchen garden. And I live in Eagle Rock, and so I live on a hillside. There's not a lot of flat surface, but we are very fortunate in the sense that there's a community garden on at the bottom of our hill. And so that's where we do most of our gardening. Okay. So we've got our bananas there, and then we're going to just put the rest of the custard on the top. I was talking to a friend the other day, and she'd given this cookbook to a woman in her jewelry class. And the woman in the jewelry class got conned into entering a pie baking contest. So she didn't know what to do since she didn't really know how to bake a pie. So she saw this recipe, and she did it, and she won the contest. So that's kind of exciting. Okay, so covered that up, like so. And then we're going to put some whipped cream on the top. So the recipe calls for a cup of whipping cream. I like to use this organic cream. It's very nice. Trader Joe's carries a cream. Oh, it's in a little bottle. It's like a manufacturing cream. It's a little too rich. So this one I think is better. About a cup. When you whip cream, it needs to be cold. And you preferably want to do it in a metal bowl. It just works so much better. And often I do this by hand. I don't use a mixer. I just use a big whisk. And if your bowl is chilled, it's very, very easy to do. But we're going to use this mixer. And we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar. Now, while that's whipping, I brought some chocolate. This is the chocolate that I like to use. It's good, it tastes good, and it's a bargain. So one of the ways to make the top of your pie kind of pretty is to make some nice shavings. We want to keep an eye on that because, of course, if you whip cream for too long, it turns to butter. So you can make shavings just by having a nice chunk of chocolate like this and use a good vegetable peeler. This is a good one because it's very sharp. Sometimes it's nice to warm it a little bit. That way you get little curls. And you can do that sometimes with the heat of your hand, or you can, hold it over a burner. This is an induction burner, so unless I'm actually touching it, I guess I won't get any heat from it. But I always do this on a piece of wax paper. Just that way you don't have to worry about making a mess. And you don't have to touch the little curls because they're so delicate. If you touch them with your fingers, they would either melt or fall apart. Okay, I'm getting to the point where I don't want to walk away from the whipped cream because I don't want it to go too far. So generally the rule is you whip the cream until it just loses that glossiness. You can kind of tell when it goes from being super shiny to slightly matte. So you just put those. And of course, if you've made the white chocolate pie with the white peaches, then you could take a chunk of white chocolate and do the same. there we have it. Use this. Now, we should put this in the refrigerator to chill a little bit, but we're just going to pretend like it did, which might make it a little trickier to get the whipped cream to spread evenly, but I think we can make do. I think we'll manage. So once again, this is a good time for your little offset spatula. Comes in very handy. Kind of just push it towards the edge to kind of cover it up. And if you like whipped cream, you can use twice as much. Could be really piled high with whipped cream. There's a restaurant, Pasadena Pie and Burger. I don't know if you've ever been there, but their pies look like that. All right, so you just kind of make that look a little bit prettier. And then got our little curls here. And you just kind of shake them over the top of the pie. There we go. So that was very fast. Thank you. It would be the perfect pie to put in somebody's face, but I think it's too delicious. So if you have any questions while you're eating pie, please ask. None? Yeah?
So, can you tell us a little bit about your garden and
Yes.
what you got?
I can. Oh, there's some chocolate cake. I don't have a picture to talk about. Well, let's see. I have a, the community garden is it's great. It really allows for a lot of creativity there. Generally, they give people plots that are about 10 by 5, and they're about 12 inches high. It's a raised bed. So I have one of those. And then I have a neighbor who's expecting, and she didn't have the wherewithal to do her plot. So we got to do her plot too. And then we have a lot of planters that we kind of find little places in the sun, because what it is it's an old red line access. So it's kind of this funny gully, and we have to allow for Southern California Edison to come in and do the power lines. So we have to leave this like path in the center. So we have these plots around. Over the summer, I planted tomatoes. I had some beans. There's a picture up of some beautiful purple beans. Those were really great. It was like a flat purple Roma bean. We planted lots of cherry tomatoes. Tomatoes were a little disappointing this year. We had that high heat in June, so it caused a lot of the blossoms not to set. So we had a couple of plants that were just so robust and beautiful, and they never put a piece of fruit out. So then we would yank those and then scramble and find another tomato plant and put that in. I always grow a combination of heirloom tomatoes and hybrid tomatoes, and this year for me, the hybrids did better. My lemon boys were awesome. So let's see, what else did we have? Oh, we had eggplant growing in the garden, and always lots of herbs. And we have lots of planters with different herbs, and we try different things. There are a few beds in our community garden that are shady. They're under the oak tree, and therefore nobody wants them. So what a fellow gardener and I figured out is that we can grow lettuce in the summer. And generally, it's a little too hot in Southern California to grow lettuce in the summer. But because these are shaded, it grows really well. So I grow lettuce year-round. I don't ever have to buy one of those bags of salad anymore, and it's just remarkable how the flavor is just so delicious from fresh lettuce greens, and they're just so easy to grow. So I really kind of try to encourage people to grow lettuce greens because it's just very fun and delicious. Lots of frisee growing, that's one of my favorite salads, and that grows really well. The bugs will kind of tend to go after the arugula and some of the stuff, but they don't touch the frisee, so that's great. In my home, where I'm on a hillside, I live in Eagle Rock, so I live like in the Eagle Rock practically. It's that hard. We had to bring, jackhammers to dig holes in our hillside to plant a couple of citrus trees. But I do have citrus trees. I have a wonderful plum tree, and then I have a funny little raised beds. I'm always trying to eke out some dirt where I can grow something. So yes, that's it. And I've got the chickens that, of course, produce the wonderful manure that help me with my gardening. So anybody else have any questions? No? How's the pie? Have you eaten pie yet? Is it good? Good. Great. Yeah. I did have a goat. My goat passed away on Tuesday. I know. So she was 14 years old, and we like to think she had a very good goat life. But so that was sad. Jimmy, did you have a question?
Yeah, so why did you raise the chicken that has the blue eggs versus the white eggs?
Well, I raise chickens that have that also lay the brown eggs. There's something really fun about the blue eggs. It's called an Araucana chicken, or sometimes they're called Americana chickens. People who raise chickens are kind of a funny group. There are chicken fanciers, and they're almost like people who breed dogs. So there's kind of, people will get up in arms if I say I have Araucana chickens. They'll say, no, you don't, because you can only get them from a certain breeder. So they'll tend to say that my chickens are chickens with a blue egg laying gene. Whatever, it doesn't really seem to matter. They lay these blue eggs and they're good. They can be a little temperamental, those chickens. They go on periods of time where they won't lay. Like I only had one to bring in today instead of, in the spring, that's mostly all I had was blue eggs, and my chickens that lay brown eggs weren't laying at all. So it's interesting how, they can be. I have blue Australorps, which are these wonderful kind of inky black, almost blue chickens. They're from Australia. And right now I have barred Plymouth Rocks, and they're these really nice black and white striped chickens. And then the Araucanas. And I think my next batch I'm going to do something where I get maybe buff Orpingtons, which are these really nice kind of dusky colored chickens. I don't tend to like a Rhode Island red. They're good layers, but they're kind of nasty. So. And chickens, I don't know if any of you have kids, but they love raising the chicks. It's really fun. So, any other questions?
How did you end up going to school in Paris?
When I was in high school, I was a Rotary International exchange student in the south of France, and I hated school because it was, in France it's a very regimented school system, so I would go there and they really wouldn't have anything to do with me because I didn't speak the language well enough to perform at grade level, and then they didn't really know what to do with me. So basically I just cooked and traveled and ate with the different host families. It was a really good year. And so I came back and I graduated from high school and, kind of didn't really know what to do with myself. And I thought, well, gee, I really like cooking. And so that's why I went back I spent about a year catering for all my mother's friends and saved enough money to go to Paris for, it was just about 3 months, and went to cooking school there. But in as much as that's a good education in that you're living in France, I don't necessarily recommend going to cooking school like that. I don't think that's really where you learn your chops. I came back, I worked at a restaurant called La Toque. It's where the Bar Marmont is right now on Sunset. And Ken Franke used to work for Michael's. It was kind of one of those seminal Los Angeles restaurants. And I worked there, And restaurant work is hard work. I'd get to work at 3, I'd get home at 1, and I'd make 100 souffles in a night, and you just gotta go, oh gosh, what am I doing? And so I had a good friend at that time who was working for Bon Appetit magazine, and at that point they had freelance recipe testers, and I managed to get a job doing that. And that was great because I would do that once a week, and I also went to Cal State LA at the same time. And so that was great to do the cooking there. And then when they hired full-time recipe testers, I became one of those people. And that was a great job because when you're a recipe tester, all the recipes from all the chefs and recipe developers from around the country come in and they get tested. And so you might see a technique you're not familiar with, or a technique that maybe your instincts or training tells you that it's wrong. But it's coming from a really well-renowned chef, and so it forces you to do it a different way. So you're cooking all these different styles, and that is just a wonderful, wonderful way to learn how to cook. So that's, I think, where I really learned the most about cooking was having that job. And it's also forcing you to cook something you don't necessarily want to cook. It's your job today is to test, homemade like pasta that you have to put in a bowl with 6 different sauces or something. I mean, I would never make that at home, but that was your job for that day, and you do learn a lot from doing things like that.
So you've also done work for Cooking Light. So how did you learn to do kind of adaptation that?
Oh, yeah, Cooking Light. Well, I think my philosophy when it comes to cooking savory foods is basically kind of a Cooking Light style. I don't have to change what I do that much. Maybe I'll cut down on the amount of fat a little bit, use a nonstick skillet. The only trouble that I get into with Cooking Light is when baking. That is a skill that I really admire those people that they can do that to get that balance right, where you have not too much fat, the carbohydrates, get that, usually what I do, if they do have assigned something to me that has a dessert story, like in this month's issue, I did a story called Go Ahead, Give In. It's about giving in to your cravings, and how they had a doctor write the intro, and it talks about how if you do have a craving, they say it's really important just to go ahead and satisfy that craving, because if you try to avoid it, you end up eating so many other things to satisfy that craving that you probably consume more calories in the long run. So with that story, there's a great brownie in that. I highly recommend it. It's really good, and it's amazing. You wouldn't even know it was low fat. But what I would do with that story is I would do something up, and I would send it in to them and say, how are my numbers here? And then they would run it through their analysis and come back and they say, well, you have to cut down a little bit on the fat, or do this. And so then I would rework the recipe. So that was really great to be able to have that opportunity to do that. A lot of the people who develop recipes for Cooking Light are registered dietitians, and they have those programs already, so they know how to do that. For me, they do have to help me out a little bit because that is not my expertise, the low-fat cooking. But any other questions? Yes? Well, I love AOC and Luke and Hungry Cat. That's just a trio of great spots. I had a really fun dinner the other night at Tosca. I don't go out to eat that often. I'm so busy cooking at home that I don't usually have the energy to go out. I also, I live on the east side. Don't like to drive, the whole thing. Sometimes it's so nice to just sit in your backyard. It's not like I don't enjoy going out to dinner, but still. But yeah, those are the ones that you can always count on for a good meal. I've never been disappointed. So, anything else?
How about the chefs in Los Angeles do you respect the most, like Susan Goin?
Well, Susan Goin, of course, and David Lentz, I think, is her husband. I'm not the super au courant person. I don't when it comes to restaurants. I mean, I try to keep up with that stuff. I had a couple of great meals at a restaurant downtown called Blue Water, where the chef was Chris Morningstar. He's not there right now. I don't know where he is, but I thought he was doing some very, very interesting cooking. He had a little garden that he was growing on the roof, and he was bringing down very fresh vegetables and herbs and things. I thought he was doing some very fine work. Other than that, you know, it's a full-time job keeping up with all the chefs and the restaurants and what's going on in town. And you know, I've got my hands full with the garden and the recipe development. So it's like I usually have these days where it's like I know what I'm going to be cooking on a certain day and schedule the things out. So, but yeah, I have a daughter who goes to college in Portland, and I think Portland is an awesome eating town. I've been going to really great restaurants up there. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, there's just a different feeling up there when you, yeah, it's great. You go up there and it's very casual. You go in, they love you, they're nice. There's not that feeling of, yeah. Yes. Yeah, yeah, I think it's just a great, great food scene, and I like that they're, yeah, and their restaurants, I think they have a great thing going with their restaurants. It's not that super kind of slick, you know, thing. It's like, here's a simple place, we're going to come and serve you really good food, and there's no, like, oh, are you going to get a good table, or, you know, none of that, so that's nice. Oh, gee, a lot of them come from the garden, or maybe just, you know, what I feel like eating that day. Trying to think, you know, sometimes I'll get inspired by, you know, I'm developing a recipe right now for a chicken cooked in Riesling. And so I'll go down to the garden and I'll kind of look at the herbs that I have there, and I'll think, gee, you know, I'm going to try this with savory, you know, and that might really bring out the flavors of the Riesling. Just little things like that will often inspire me. Otherwise, I'll look at classics and try to find ways to update them and simplify them, make them better for, you know, our California palate, you know, what people want to eat now. Streamline recipes, that's my big thing. I like to make things as easy and simple as possible, because nobody's really going to cook it if it takes too much time. People don't have a lot of time, and so I think recipes need to be simple, straightforward, and, you know, deliver good flavor. So. Any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to you know, spend the lunch hour with you baking pies, so thanks. Oh, and I do have a website. I'll put up the recipe for the nectarine pie on the website. It's called JeanneKelleyKitchen.com, and I put little recipes up there and things like that. So if you want the nectarine version, or the white peach version, excuse me, you can go find that recipe there. Thank you.